Hello everyone, and welcome to Fleet's Catch-Up Ramblings. Yes, once again, we're back, catching up on a Friday. I know, it's shocking. What a shocking revelation to be back here once again, as we sometimes are. But yes, we are actually back now, catching up on a Friday. And yeah, there we go. It's yeah. There you have it. Curse that Patreon text word limit. Never mind. Can't have it all. No matter how much I might want to. So yeah, as per usual, catch-up ramblings. Oh, that reminds me, I did promise a certain somebody that I would let them know. So I will. Right, so without further ado, we should be able to get cracking. Shame about Wednesday, but, well, I had things to deal with, unfortunately. So there was no stream that day. It's annoying, but hey-ho, it is what it is. Can't have it all. So, catch-up ramblings. Nice and easy. Just powering through the questions. Hello, Timu. Hello, Gunner Officer, Tankax. Ruinon is here, as per usual. Jolly good. So we've got some questions to get through. Nice and easy. Let me see how many have we got. Hamana. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 questions. Nice. Not too long, not too short. Just right. About an hour and a half, I reckon.
That's what you think.
Well then, if there are more, shove them in there. I want to know how many I've got. If there's any more in the...
No, that's all of them.
Right, well in that case then, yeah, about an hour and a half is what I'm expecting. Oh, I'll also send the man a DM as well, just in case. I'm live. Num. Oh, I need cold water to keep me going in this heat. Good lord above. It's too warm. Right, so without further... Ah, here he is! Here he... Oh, wow. Wow. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. So, we've got 15 questions to get through. Across a variety of... And it's a nice swathe across multiple eras, which I quite like. To be fair, Monday was quite a good ramblings, actually.
Just be ready for next week.
Yes, I know.
I won't be here on Monday, so have fun.
I'm probably just going to shut that down until the week after. Because, honestly, I ain't touching that till we know. Even if it happens, I ain't touching that until we know more. So I ain't touching that till the week after. If it happens. If it happens. Right.
Well, lucky for you, July 4th is a Friday, so I'll be off on that one.
Oh, boy.
Now, I could end up out, inshore fishing. We'll see.
Yes. So, typical officer asks, opinions on the Trecroner class cruisers and the Italian aesthetics of its design. Do you think it's the best cruise with a 6-inch dual-purpose gun, better than the Tiger and the Worcesters? Okay, the Trecroners as cruisers are a uniquely Swedish solution to a uniquely Swedish problem. When it comes to cruiser design and construction. And I don't really get where the whole Italian aesthetics are you're coming from. To me, they look thoroughly Swedish. The only way you might possibly say they look Italian is possibly the mounts for their primary armament. But not really. But either way, getting back to the cruisers themselves. The Trekronas technically have dual-purpose 6-inch guns. I don't know how effective they were in that role. They definitely weren't the best AA cruiser with a 6-inch gun. I'm sorry, the Worcester exists.
Is it technically dual purpose in the same way the later U.S. Cleveland derivation subclass follow-ons, whatever you want to call them, had dual purpose?
I don't know. It doesn't say. I'm trying to find out. They had 70 degrees elevation, but I don't know if it was linked to fire control or shells that would make it work. I'm not seeing any evidence of that. But even so, even if it was, I'm sorry, you're putting them up against Tiger and Worcester. Those ships have auto-loading 6-inch guns.
One class was built.
Yeah. And I like the Trekronas, but they only have 7 guns. And that's actually a low enough barrel count that Tiger's autoloaders might actually give her a rate of fire per minute equivalence. And Worcester is just laughing all the way to the bank.
Even if she's firing on her reduced rate of fire, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they're not. They are not the best cruiser with a 6-inch dual-purpose gun. That is. That's the Worcesters. Easily.
Gunnery officer, I have a question for you. Why do you ask questions in this format? You pick something and you like ask if it's the best one out there or this, and generally they're sort of
Middling?
out there takes about something being the best if someone were to say that. So and you can respond here in Ramblings text because I see you're in the live audience.
We're not upset.
I'm just curious because you've done this with a bunch of equipment. I'm not criticizing you. I'm legitimately curious.
Yeah, like it gives a chance to talk through some of the kit and why it's good and why it's bad. So as a format, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just a very interesting way to format a question. YouTube Minecraft.
I feel like you're being very British there.
Newsflash, Ruinon. It may surprise you to learn this, but shock horror, brace for it. I'm British.
He's British.
Yes, but
it is very horrifying.
In the same way that you or I, Cyclic, can be very American, Fleet can also be very British.
You haven't seen me go full Yorkshire yet.
I'll pass.
Yeah, probably for the wines. Typical gunnery officer. This is something I actually don't know. I'd have to go and look it up, but maybe Cyclic knows. Why did the French have a thing or obsession for auto-loading tanks after World War II?
They weren't the only ones. Pretty much everybody was looking at autoloaders. I mean, heck, even during World War II, the U.S. developed an autoloader for the Sherman. We weren't happy with the risks to crew from it. Like, it's right up there with the BMP-1's autoloader in terms of hazards to crew.
That's bad.
And by the way, the reputation of the BMP-1's autoloader tends to get thrown onto Russian tank autoloaders. This is generally not the case in Russian tank autoloaders, particularly T-64 through T-80 and even onto T-90. Anyways, so like everybody was looking at this. The U.S. had several oscillating turret prototypes The French did it as a way to maximize firepower, and quite frankly, they only really ended up fielding it on their lighter vehicles.
1375 and 1390.
Yeah.
Which, to be fair, for light tanks of the period they were built, gave them a heck of a kick.
To an extent, yes. So, there's, and the whole reason you do the oscillating turret is so that you don't have to constantly align your barrel and autoloader and all that. It simplifies the system. They did it to maximize firepower and minimize manpower, particularly in these lighter forces that they had. So that's just why they did it. And the other thing is, for typical tank engagements, you're talking 10 to 15 rounds, rapid, quote unquote rapid, if that. So it can give you, particularly in this period, this early period here, where it's fire and adjust is your fire control. Even with the rangefinders that exist and all that, you still have to take the shot, see where it goes, adjust, take a follow-up. That's a very valuable thing. And if you're trying to minimize size as well, because we're in a period where laser rangefinders and thermals don't exist, the smaller your vehicle, generally speaking, the harder it is to knock out, because it's harder to land a hit. So you are talking a lower profile vehicle where a human loader would struggle with these rounds because there's just not the space. The autoloader is in that cramped of an environment, able to still maintain a reasonable to potentially fast rate of fire for your first couple of shots. That's a huge deal. But conversely, when you start thinking about an NBC environment, you run into problems because you can, in fact, not NBC protect an oscillating turret vehicle. There's just too many leaks. You can't overpressure it effectively enough.
Whoops.
To answer your question, Fleet, he does not seem to have submitted the second half of the question.
Well, in that case, you can't answer that one. Because I don't have the second part of it. Knight, you asked a question about a Western Whirlwind that failed with 5 blokes on board. And you didn't ask part 2. This question. Could you this was part 1 of your question. Could you give me the part 2 for that?
Ask the
please?
rest of it.
Yeah. Thanks. I'll leave that until you've gotten back to me in YouTube chat. Because I see you are there. Gunner Officer asks, opinions on the US night fighter, the F-3D Sky Knight. Do you think it's the best night fighting aircraft in Korea and has an underrated service record? Especially at shooting down MiG-15s. Now
it was really the only night fighting aircraft of Korea, to be blunt. But it's better known for its strike, and eventual use as a airborne early warning and control aircraft.
Oh, that funny thing is, I actually knew about Korea. I had no idea it had undertaken strike missions or AEW at all.
Yeah, you have a co-pilot in there who's also operating the radar. You have for the period, rather reasonable radar, and it's got a decent payload to it too. You've got 420 millimeters for strafing, if you're doing strike or close air, because the Marines used it too. Eventually, it would get Sparrow 1s, by the way.
Oh, very nice.
It can carry 2 Tiny Tims or 2 2,000-pound bombs.
Very nice.
Yeah. So it's only got 2 hard points, but like what it can carry is very useful stuff. But yeah, the Sparrow 1 is a very interesting. I'll throw an image in chat, and maybe Fleet can.
Yeah, I'll see if
make
I
it so
can.
it's
Yeah, I'll see if
available.
I can. Yeah, yeet it up on the.
But so the Sparrow 1 is a interesting weapon.
Define interesting in
It's
what
a
way?
it's a radar beam rider.
Okay.
And on a single seat fighter, it was slaved to a sort of a gun sight. And then on the night fighters, the radar, it was slaved to where the radar was looking. So if you locked the radar on to
Something.
the target, it would follow the beam of that.
So in
that
theory,
radar.
you could use it against anything you locked the radar on, be it in the air or not in the air.
With these radars, you're not really talking about a very good ground stuff, but yeah, what this did is this allowed the Navy to have a rather, particularly for the 1950s, early 1950s, a rather robust all-weather day-night defense against incoming strike aircraft.
Let me think. Early 50s. I don't think Badger's there yet, is it?
No, but you have various. You have like IL-28,
Yeah,
and the Tupolev equivalent. So. But,
no, actually, no.
and they are-
No, Badger is there. Badger is there by that point, by 53, 54. Yeah, Badger is there.
Okay. Yeah, and you're talking the KS-1
Ooh, that
Comet
thing.
AS-1 Kennel on the Badger as well. So yeah. And that, by the way, you also have Tu-4s that could carry those too. So you have these aircraft that you do need to be able to intercept.
And standoff intercept as well.
Not too standoffish. Like KS-1, you're talking like 100 kilometers. It's not that.
Oh, neat. Gunnery officers actually provided an image of a Tu-4 carrying a KS-1. It does show very well just the raw size of that platform, especially because people know what, as a Western audience, how big a B-29 is. So it does give a much better indication of how big. Because, I mean,
and then you see it on a Tu-4 there. Here's it on a Badger. Now this is up close, but this should give you a comparison in size between the Badger and the Tu-4.
It's a MiG-15 cruise missile edition.
Kind of.
Not really, but I mean, it did lead to the somewhat amusing Soviet idea of, well, if we can carry
6,600 pounds.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it was basically, if our bombers can carry some of these under the wings, can they also carry a MiG? And so
no, it didn't. It didn't give them that idea.
I know the Soviets did experiment with carrier aircraft for a limited period in the Cold War.
Everybody did. Yeah, so keep in mind this is like 2/3 the weight of a MiG-15 that is empty.
Mm.
And a MiG-15, loaded with fuel is significantly more. It's almost double. So, but yeah, there were plenty of threats out there that were day-night threats that you needed interceptors for. And the F3 filled that nighttime and all-weather role because of its radar.
Makes sense. Right, so, Knight has actually given the second part. So, on November 16th, 1962, XN-360, a Western Whirlwind HAS-7 with 2 Royal Navy, 1 RAF, and Lord Whittlesham and the Labour MP for Loughborough took off with them on board, back to RNS Brawdy from Hermes when the engine failed and it crashed into the sea. What is it about the S-55 that allowed the 2 RN and Labour MP for Loughborough to survive when the RAF officer and Lord Whittlesham didn't?
Luck. It's an aircraft accident. It's luck.
Yeah, basically. Especially going down in the sea. Basically. Ain't nothing to do with the aircraft at that point. So did that one. You should Minecraft Watcher asks, what if in 1942 a bubonic plague outbreak occurs in multiple German cities? How quickly would it get out of hand? There's no antidote for the bubonic plague, is there? But can you treat it with antibiotics? I'm not sure.
Yeah, you can.
Might cause some disruption, but they'll probably get it under control real quick.
Odds are they're going to catch it a lot earlier. And, well, in this period, the Germans are very good at producing arsenic for dealing with all the rats.
Yeah.
And additionally, something I'm going to point out is that
might actually save lives.
As callous as this may sound, a lot of the lineages that were genetically more susceptible to a disease like bubonic plague got eliminated during the original Black Plague.
They really don't exist by this period, mostly in Europe, unless that was the level of population
devastation,
annihilation that hit Europe with that.
Yeah, so it's going to be bad, but it's not going to be catastrophic.
And also, just a quick aside while we're on the topic, I was actually doing a bit of research and digging on, the plague doctors who were trying to actually, solve the problem. And, in popular culture, they get a lot of flack. But if you think about it, they really were kind of ahead of their time in a way. They realized that something was transmitting the disease, so they protected as many angles of infection on themselves as they could. They shared knowledge with each other. They may not have been as up with research and germ theory as we are nowadays, but...
Well, germ theory didn't exist.
Yes. But I'd argue that they given...
That didn't come around for another few centuries.
Yeah, but given what they had to deal with at the time, I think they did a remarkable job, all things considered.
Fleet, I think they did okay. Explosion in the background.
Well, considering what they had to work with. Steve Clark asks, another hypothetical scenario. Japan does not starting to build the second pair of Yamatos, but opts to lay down 2 more Shikaku-class fleet carriers, so basically just repeats, that's not the worst idea, and 2 flotillas of destroyers and 4 more cruisers to escort them, disposing of old ships like Hosho, or more likely, as he puts in brackets, gifting them to the IJA as aircraft transports, and relegating the small carrier Ryujo to the role of an ASW escort carrier to escort invasion forces. Just very quickly, Ryujo is not small, but she is small, but in terms of how many aircraft she can carry and the punch she can deliver...
She was kind of a light fleet sort of deal for the Japanese, yeah. But I don't think she'd be used as an ASW escort. Knowing
But
the
can I just-
Japanese, I think
Yeah, basically the question
should
is,
be used as a general carrier escort
Yeah.
to provide fighter and dive bomber and torpedo
Yeah.
bomber coverage.
yeah, how much does anything does this change anything in change Japanese strategy going to Pearl Harbor in 42? So if they've got a pair of Shikakus on the build, presumably. So when were the second pair of Yamatos laid down? Because that will then tell me when. So May and November 1940. So they're gonna come in a little bit after Taiho is finished. Possibly around the same time as Taiho, because building something the size of a Shikaku is going to take less time than building something the size of a Yamato.
I mean, my overall thought is, maybe they expand their training program a little bit more.
Yeah, if you've got to fill two more flight decks, two more full-size flight decks.
That would probably be the biggest overall impact.
Yeah.
Because they never really, because of their conversions, they ran out of pilots long before they ran out of planes and carriers.
Yeah.
And I mean, it may or may not extend the Pacific War. And the reason I say that is it kind of comes down to the Solomon Islands, which pretty much no matter what, we're going to become a nexus of a fight because of the U.S.-Australia shipping links. And boy, if it extends the war, whew.
Not only do you have more friendly sunshine, you also have other problems.
Like mass starvation.
Yes.
Well, if it extends the war, what it means is the U.S. grip around the Japanese home islands actually takes a little bit longer to get going, and it means the B-29s are not going to be in a position as early to start really wearing down the Japanese home island defenses. Because it's going to take longer to get to the Marianas.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, the Battle of the Philippine Sea or whatever late war carrier engagement occurs, that's, if we take into account what Saki said about a larger training program, the fact they not only now have Taiho assuming that everything else goes roughly similar. Yes, they've got more flotillas of destroyers and cruisers, but I can't see that affecting Guadalcanal too much.
I can. You know why?
Okay.
If they're more aggressive with their carriers because they have more pilots, Guadalcanal is going to be longer. The U.S. may lose more aircraft carriers down there.
Yeah.
So the U.S. offensive itself may be delayed. The Guadalcanal campaign may play out a lot longer.
I mean, if they've got more modern cruisers,
well, not only that, but I'm what's deciding the Guadalcanal fight is the carrier actions.
Yeah.
Realistically, because if the Japanese are able to establish daytime dominance around the islands, which they may or may not be, but at least keep the U.S. from doing that, the U.S. is going to be in a far tougher position for that fight. And you may see it kind of grind down and bog down for both sides, neither side really able to really go on the offensive and having to run supplies in just to keep their troops scraping by.
But neither side really able or willing to disengage from that
until the U.S. is really able to get USS Essex in.
When does Essex commission? Let's have a look.
And I don't believe she's the only Essex class carrier in the first run. So
no, she ain't. Let's have a look.
You're gonna.
Yeah, so
it's that first crop.
Yeah. No, it is. There is a gap. Essex comes in December 42, and then it's another 5 months until you get Yorktown, second Yorktown.
Okay. But yeah, until USS Essex comes into play to help potentially offset some of these losses, you could end up in a scenario where Enterprise doesn't make it, or Saratoga doesn't make it,
And the British
because instead of running into a submarine constantly, Saratoga gets plastered by a hammerhead attack from Kates and potentially hit by dive bombers, like the Japanese love to do, or Enterprise eats it.
yeah.
So,
And I mean, at that point, the British are not going to be willing to send a carrier in to that
not
mess.
Solo.
Yeah, to that mess.
Even
Even if one of the other carriers is down for repair, the British are going to look at that and go,
oh, you'll probably still see a British carrier, but that carrier is not going to be charging in offensively. That carrier is going to be acting defensively.
With whatever US carrier is left
around the base. The base is on the other side of the sea.
Yeah.
So I can't remember the Samoa sort of deal, that area.
Yeah.
But and she may be working with Ranger.
You really think
Just
the US
because
is going
that's
to
what the
pull
US
in Ranger?
if that's what the US has, and she's okay defensively. Her biggest problem is the lack of a torpedo magazine, so she can't carry torpedo bombers.
Yeah.
Well,
At
with
first.
the torpedoes.
Yeah.
She can carry torpedo bombers, but they're going to be restricted pretty much to bombs. Which means she's effective in targeting stuff ashore, but not, maritime targets, because fundamentally what tends to put a lot of ships down, bar Midway, is torpedoes.
Yeah.
And the US did use torpedo bombers in that role quite a bit, and they score some hits in Coral Sea and I believe in the Solomons with them.
Yeah.
I could be wrong in the Solomons, me misremembering, but I know in Coral Sea we did on Shoho. And in Lady Gulf and Philippine Sea, I believe that was done as well. So, and I know, in the Solomons campaign, yes, there were, because a Japanese battleship was put down by torpedo bombers, or battle cruiser, whatever you want to call a Congo.
Yeah.
I'll leave that to each individual.
Yeah. I've
Personally,
still
more with Drac.
Yeah. I have no firm opinion one way or the other between my colleagues. It feels weird I can call them colleagues, but yes, they are colleagues now.
So I think the real impact is going to be around the Solomons, even if these two carriers are not there, because the Japanese are going to have spun up their pilot training program more, because they have more air wings to fill out.
Yeah.
And that's going to follow on from there. There's probably going to be another series of fights and engagements, but I mean, ultimately, once the big fleet's there, they're going to just be another suite of deep sea reefs.
Mm-hmm. I mean, they're gonna,
or if they're in Japan when it happens, the shallow water reefs.
Yeah.
Or breakwaters. Like,
the war only ends one way. The only thing that increasing the Japanese,
I don't think Steve Clark is going that route, or Steve Clark, Mr. Clark here in this case.
Yes.
Can't remember if his name is literally, if he does have the same first name. My brain is fried at the moment.
Yeah.
So
I mean, no. I was more saying generally cyclic rather than to Steve directly. I mean, all giving the Axis more capability does is change how slowly they die and how much it costs. That's the thing. For the most part, except in very extreme and niche circumstances.
yeah. Now the funny thing is, depending how things go, we could end up seeing a cruiser engagement later in the war where a Des Moines rocks up on something. Now, what we will see is Baltimore's probably rocking up on something in a cruiser fight.
That's going to be just you die now.
Even Baltimore's, but Des Moines especially.
Yeah.
Des Moines is sort of the equivalent of running in terms of the amount of fire you're taking, the equivalent of running into a freaking squadron of Baltimores. It's terrifying.
Yeah.
Um,
The Japanese have no counter, to be fair. Even the Congos, I look at that and go,
Nobody has a counter to a Des Moines unless it's a battleship, and even then it's sketchy,
yeah.
particularly at close range.
Yep. So, if the Surigao Strait equivalent takes place in, let's say the Guadalcanal campaign drags on to 43, 44, and then the
I don't
US
think you're going to see a Surigao Strait equivalent. If the Japanese are doing well enough, what you're going to see is another Philippine Sea style engagement if they're doing well enough.
That's going to be
with their carrier aircraft.
That's going to
Or carrier
be
pilots.
at least. So that's going to be one. That's going to be one, possibly two Shikakus, plus all the light carrier conversions, plus Taiho, plus the two new
Halsey's going to have his
Shikakus.
chance. Yeah.
Yeah, plus the two new Shikakus.
Oh no,
with-
there could be a Central Pacific Drive gunnery officer. There's just going to be probably another big carrier battle that's actually a battle and
It's a fair
not
fight.
kicking,
Well, sorry,
not
not
kicking puppies.
yeah. Like the US might still win it, but it's gonna be we've sunk more carriers than they sunk of ours, or we can
The
regenerate the
other-
losses.
The other aspect is if the U.S. loses another carrier in the Guadalcanal campaign, I think the Independence class CVLs are going to have more of a storied history.
Oh god, fun times for those boys.
Because they're going to get used for more than just providing, cap for the carrier forces.
Because
They're
they'll
gonna
have to.
They're going to have to help fill out the remaining strength.
Which will lead to the amusing
For a little while.
which will lead to the somewhat interesting circumstance of light carriers being frontline combatants on both sides. Whereas they were only frontline combatants really for the Japanese because they had no choice, they needed the flight decks.
Yeah.
Whereas now both sides have no choice but to commit. You should Minecraft Watcher asks, well, what if in 1941 all 4-engine bombers turned into B-29 Superfortresses for the Allies and the production facilities changed to accommodate them? And I assume that means everyone working there as well. Well, B-29 is nice, but it does have a slight problem of, oh my god, all my engines are on fire. All the time.
Early on, but they'll get that solved relatively quick.
Oh, poor Germany.
It's
Poor Germany.
It's
Dear.
It might actually wear down the Luftwaffe less because fewer of their fighters are going to be able to hit these things. So they're going to be less inclined to send everything up and then get munched on by escorts eventually when the escorts happen.
And it might also it might also lead to another side effect, which is Speer might get moving on dispersed production even quicker than he historically did, which will make things even more difficult for the Allied bombing campaign, and it will have to switch to area bombing even faster and just focus on razing German cities to the ground as quickly as possible to try and force the Luftwaffe up, which still isn't going to work.
Or they decide to shift their targets to rail yards and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Stuff you can't
really miss.
Oh no, you can miss them in World War II quite easily.
Not if you throw enough bombs.
Oh no, they can end up at the wrong. They can end up at the wrong city.
Oh,
like They did this routinely.
Oh yeah,
Um,
I've been watching Hard Thrasher's video series on them. Yeah, I'm aware. They're just like, oh, this isn't the city we're supposed to be at. Oh well, bomb it anyway. Might we see more impetus for the Luftwaffe to get going on Tank's proposal for a high wing, for what becomes the TA-152? A long wing, high altitude FW 190 derivative, just something to go
Maybe.
up there and poke the 29s.
They have some 109s that can, but I mean, we'd see it. This isn't going to have that big of an impact on the war.
Oh no, I was more just
Um,
thinking the amount
yeah.
of high explosive delivered to Germany generally is going to increase.
Well, yes, just by dint of payload.
But it's not going to have that big of an impact on the war. The main thing the Strategic Bombing Offensive did was basically, for both the British and the Americans, while they did get better at hitting strategic targets, the main thing it did was forcing the forcing the Luftwaffe to A, withdraw from the fighting fronts, and then B, come up to be destroyed. That was the big win. That's the key thing a lot of people miss. The win was not any damage done to German industry or population. The big win was destroying the German Air Force as a credible threat.
They were able to seriously impact ball bearing production and other things that had knock-on effects, as well as
Killing civilians tends to decrease war production, as it turns out, surprisingly.
well, it was less for the killing civilians and more for actually targeting the facilities.
Well, yes.
For ball bearing production. The other thing was synthetic oil and oil refining, and synthetic rubber production was impacted.
I will admit, though, by 45, the RAF had gotten very good at it. I mean, look at Dresden. Dresden was a masterstroke. Just that city was...
You're gonna piss people off with that, and I love you for it, Fleet.
Like, I'm sorry, but...
You're absolutely right. Hitting this is one of the reasons I mentioned rail hubs. So that had a huge impact.
And, like, I'm sorry...
And
really
helped that. Really helped the Soviets out.
It did, yeah. They were quite grateful.
At a critical point.
Yeah. It also destroyed the idea of Dresden as a fortress city, which Guderian had declared it as a few months prior. Just destroyed that concept completely. But also, again, politely, and for any... And I can see the Wereabou's being directed to my location now. Let me just remind you of something. Who started the war? And who dropped the first bombs on civilians? Yep, sorry. Was that the Germans? Yep, sorry. Take your bleeding hearts elsewhere.
Yeah, who was waging a war of extermination on entire swathes of people?
Yeah.
Like, calm down.
Scoop, I think Scoop puts it best. What did Warsaw look like in September 39?
Exactly.
Gunnery officer asks, "Oh, this is interesting." That's... Gunnery officer, you better be glad the chieftain ain't here. Question 8. What if during Desert Storm, the whole US Abrams tanks are replaced by German Leopard 2A3s and A4s? Do you think they would do a much better job at destroying Iraqi MBTs than US Abrams tanks, especially since it's manned by better trained German crews? And I'm putting on my steel helmet and ducking into my bunker because I can see the chieftain coming over the horizon now.
I'm sorry, gunnery officer. This is why I asked my question earlier. They were not better trained.
They're not.
They were still largely conscripts.
And the US was an all-volunteer force by that point.
And I don't think the thermals were any better at all. They might have been worse. Now, granted, the M1A1's thermals were a downgrade from the M1IPs, but just because of some programmatics. But Yeah, no, they weren't better, and they had worse ammunition. Not that that really would have mattered.
They're fighting T-72s,
Given
55s, and 62s. It's
you know that's not what. So the T-72s they're fighting are export versions with, and some domestic Iraqi builds.
Yeah, I know. They're not the cream of the crop. That was going to be my.
They
next
don't
point.
have the high end armor.
They don't. Now I've heard rumors that the.
Yeah, no, they're not better trained, and the guns are effectively the same. Although I think the 256 might be slightly better in this period. I have not kept up on the various versions of 256 all that well, but yeah, like I really don't understand where you're coming from on this one.
Yeah, but also, Cyclic, please answer me a question if you know the answer, because I am genuinely curious. While we're near Iraq, I find it very hard to believe that when the 62 and the 55 were sold with the same Traverse gear for their turrets that the ones the Russians had got, why were the 72 export models the Iraqis got? Like
the Iraqis specifically did not want Power Traverse because they had problems with it working during the Iran-Iraq War, and they were some pretty severe problems that they had, so it kind of poisoned them to it.
I suppose when you've actually had a conflict involving them, it does kind of, make your choices a certain way. That's interesting. I didn't know that, actually. I assumed it was because they were cheapening out or something, but no, it's because of actual experience in the Iran-Iraq War. Nice.
Yes.
Yeah, good to know. Hey, something new every day. Bowmeal Boy asks, what is the panel's assessment of the New Deal? How different is the US going into World War II and the Cold War without it? To quote one of my dear friends...
Let me put it this way. One of the big ancillary things to the New Deal was the various Navy acts. On top of that, you had massive infrastructure investment and spending in the US as part of that. So there was an abundance of easily available electricity in a lot of places. A lot of areas got built up for industry. One of the big there was a big parachute manufacturer in World War II that was out in the mountains of Virginia. Okay, that would not have been possible without TVA electricity.
Mm-hmm. I mean, just to highlight electricity for a second, one of the big East Coast arteries for trade and shipping was the Northeast Corridor. That was fully electrified under the New Deal. The wires got all the way to the full extent they are now, under the New Deal. Which was something the PRR wasn't willing to do without it.
Yeah, they just did not have the money.
But yeah, like it basically was a shot in the arm for the US. To crudely borrow a quote from one of my friends, FDR sicked the economy on the economy to fix the economy. And it kind of worked.
Yeah, you also had the Merchant Marine Act that kind of went along with all of this.
Yeah. Basically, he applied what we know as Keynesian economics. You don't austerity your way out of a deficit or a depression. You spend your way out of it. You inject money into the system.
Yes and no, but that's
I'm aware
generally proven to be one of the more effective approaches, as long as you spend it correctly.
Yeah, I'm aware it's not perfect, and I'm aware I'm oversimplifying, but yeah.
It's not a popular one to hear, but yes.
Darth Sidious asks, what if Russia split apart similar to the breakup of the USSR during the 1905 revolution? That's pandemonium. That is,
Like right now?
No. During the 1905 revolution. So if the 1905 revolution was a full, all the ethnicities are breaking away. That's that's an independent Ukraine. That's independent states in the Balkans and the Caucasus. That's an independent Poland breaking away. The Baltic states. That is the Russian Tsardom collapsing in on itself, basically. And it'll have to fight to reclaim those territories with force. Because you better believe they ain't coming back peacefully. And at that point, that's going to lead to a whole load of great power shenanigans. The Kaiser and the German general staff are punching the air in triumph. Because the Colossus is gone. The big threat on their eastern flank they've been fearing for a decade at this point is gone. And they will do everything in their power to prevent it reclaiming territory.
Keep anything from growing.
Yeah, so you better believe the Kaiser will generously offer to protect the Baltic states, Ukraine, the new Polish state. Well, no, maybe not the new Polish state. He might try to annex the new Polish state. Because the Polish state will be a threat to, himself, because he also has Poles. But the rest of them might be protected rather than annexed. It's... I mean, the biggest winner here are the people sat on their hands going, you're telling me all we had to do was sit here and do nothing? Or the Ottoman Empire? The Ottomans are sat there going, you're telling me they collapsed before we did? Okay. Although this does mean that a lot of the funding they were getting and help they were getting from the Germans and the British kind of goes away. Which is going to hurt them. But basically you've got... Well, the Japanese are basically going to seize the entirety of Manchuria, because they're going to go, well, I know we just signed a peace agreement, but I'm sorry, the Russians have collapsed, and our troops are still here. So... yeah. And with the Qing still a quasi-unified nation, you might have them making moves to seize things like the Trans-Siberian, and other bits and bobs like that. The British are going to be sat there going, potential happiness? But they'll probably also, if shit really hits the fan, potentially offer sanctuary to the Russian Tsar if things really do spiral out of control.
We'll see. They have a checkered past on that, even at this point.
Yeah. But don't forget, King Edward still is Uncle Bertie to Tsar Nicholas, even at this point.
Yeah, but still, they have a...
And if the Tsar doesn't, Kaiser Wilhelm definitely will. If the King Edward doesn't, Kaiser Wilhelm definitely will. Might even send the German fleet to get him out. If it comes to that. Because bear in mind, it's immediately in the aftermath of the Russo-Japanese War that there's nearly that break between the Russians and the French, which is driven in by the Kaiser. But, I mean, that's just... one of the great powers has been removed from the board. That's just... And at this point, the British and the French are looking at the Germans and going, right, they've got a puppet network now in Eastern Europe. The Austrians are also happy because they can do what they like in the Balkans now. And but by the way, Serbia's gone. The Austrians have squished it. Because the Austrians will. The Austrians were looking for an excuse up from about 1904 through to about 1914. When they actually, tried to squish it. And, oh, their big protector's just gone. Right, there is no Serbia anymore. It's just gonna be a massive mess. But it might also snowball into the fact that minorities are gonna go, well, if the Russian Empire can be brought down, then, well, the Ottomans are basically gonna collapse in a couple of years as well. Because their ethnicities are gonna go, oh, the Russian Empire was brought down. The Turks are weaker. So the Ottoman Sultanate is going to be reduced in size. There is a core of royal territory that will remain Ottoman. So not quite as small as the current Turkish state we know today, but of a similar size, that will remain Ottoman. But expect them to lose a good chunk, or fight a losing battle to keep places like the Levant, Mecca, Iraq, and of course Libya as well. Beyond that first 2-3 year period, where you've now got basically Brest-Litovsk, but without Brest-Litovsk having happened, a Balkans that looks similar to what we know occurred, but with the biggest form of Bulgaria, because politely, if there's no Serbia, Bulgaria is just going to win the first Balkan War and get everything they asked for. And if the Greeks try and say no, the Bulgarians are going to go, try me. And the Greeks are going to get their shit rocked. Yeah, Cyclic, you have something to say?
Not really.
But yeah, but beyond that early period, no idea. You should Minecraft Watcher. What if during Bismarck's attempt to get home it hits first a massive storm, worse than Typhoon Cobra, which is going to wreck a lot of its other works, and then after that hits a fog bank, which leads to it running aground on a Welsh beach? Well, first of all,
The Welsh happened.
Well, no. Expect there to be a rather large explosion when it becomes apparent to the German crew they can't get the ship off the beach. They aren't leaving that thing to fall into the British hands. They are setting in scuttling charges amidst the magazines and then retiring to a safe distance.
Yeah, pretty much any crew's going to do that.
Well, and at that point, the British are left with, given a ship the size of Bismarck with the sort of magazines she has for all the different calibers, there's going to be a lot of scrap metal left, but not much else. I mean, it's gonna be a massive propaganda victory for the British. I mean, I can see the headlines in the Times now. British navigation's so bad they run aground from the place they're trying to run away from. Sorry, German.
German navigation.
Now, it would be a lot better than the British capturing the ship.
Yes.
From a German perspective.
And I mean, but it is a worse outcome than actually what happened historically, because at least Bismarck historically went down fighting. Actually, no, this would literally be this wouldn't be. This would literally be the myth that, you know, scuttled not sunk, but it's unequivocally true.
It's also far more embarrassing. She wasn't beaten down first.
Yeah.
She ran aground like an idiot.
And also, if the full story is outed, it'll be, so the Germans built a ship that was not seaworthy.
Yeah.
Because even if it was, you know, the biggest Category 5 Superstorm, Sandy, Typhoon Cobra sized weather event, that's not how the propaganda machine is going to spin it. You know, they couldn't build a ship capable of handling North Atlantic weather.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that they operate in the North Atlantic.
Yeah.
And then they couldn't navigate even by dead reckoning and you know, stellar positioning.
And also, the British will get a lot clearer of an idea of what Bismarck is, because apart from some of the more ideologically motivated members of the crew, although there is the minor problem that they're going to have to capture the crew first, because they're probably going to take the ship's small arms with them. And
that's a lot of people.
Yeah, there's going to be the only battle fought on British soil is going to be with the crew of the Bismarck to capture the buggers.
And that's if they don't decide to split off into small groups and try to cause havoc.
Oh, good lord, that's going to be maddening.
Yeah, British mainland soil, because, yeah, they're...
I'm aware Channel Islands exist. But still, yeah, that's that. I don't think they didn't carry anything like portable AT or any real things of explosives unless they take some charges from the guns with them and use them as makeshift demolition charges. That's gonna be interesting. Especially if any of them have sense and try to disrupt the railway links from the Welsh coal mines to industry and power plants. That could actually put something of a crimp on certain parts of British war production, if handled properly. But either way, either they will be hunted down. It won't take too long. They have no resupply, no recourse. Although if they do sabotage, they probably won't be treated like soldiers. They'll be treated like spies and shot out of hand once they've been interrogated. However, if they fight as one unit,
I mean, if they're in uniform, then they may not be dealt with as spies. But
yeah,
it's a kind of a big propaganda win.
Yeah, and if they capture a significant portion of the crew plus the officers, they're going to be able to interrogate them, and a much clearer picture of what Bismarck actually is, above the information they already have, might become apparent. Specifically, some of her issues. Because I know people say, well, they won't tell them. Yeah, but the British have a way of putting people in rooms where they think they're alone with their comrades, and then just listening. And
that's everybody.
Yeah, I know. And people tend to drop things in conversation, so yeah, the British are going to find out. Right, typical honorary officer asks, opinions on the 1980s RDF, LT, or the HSTVL project, and why did they put an automatic 75 instead of the self-loading 105? Do you think the choice of main gun is the reason why it was cancelled? That's all you, mate. Take it away.
The T-62 and T-55s, which were the majority of Soviet armor in theater, and certainly Allied armor, i.e. Warsaw Pact. That gun is more than sufficient, and you can rapidly develop hits on target, and rapidly switch targets, develop hits on target, shift, kill, shift, kill, shift, kill. That was the whole idea behind the 76mm dart slinging autocannon. That, and with a proximity fused round, it would have been absolutely lethal against any Soviet rotary wing aviation.
Night, Denmark strike doesn't happen in this timeline. Audio check.
We can hear you. Have we lost audio on the stream?
Nope. It's just that Fleet wasn't here.
Okay, yeah, I saw Cyclic's ring lit up, but I didn't hear anything from Cyclic, and I didn't know if my Discord audio had decided to reset itself again.
No,
like it did last night.
Nope, it's just sorry for the confusion. Fleet just took the opportunity to dip out for a second to check on something while Cyclic was going on a question that was going to be solely him.
Again,
no, I wasn't. I didn't ever hear you mention a question, Fleet.
The HTSVL project.
Oh, that, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
That question, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. But there was people, I noticed somebody go Cyclic ? In the Discord chat, so I don't know if I lost audio.
I think Discord
Runon,
might have
did
had
you
a bit
hear?
of a
Did you
break
hear
button.
my explanation there on HSTVL?
Or
And
did
all of
you
that?
not?
I heard it, and you were essentially, if I remember your answer correctly, because my attention is slightly split right now, it was something to the effect of the 75 was perfectly sufficient to deal with anything that it would likely face in theater.
Until the next generation of Soviet tank came around.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's pretty much their view was speed, deployability, and the 75 had enough penetrative power and offered a whole bunch of other firepower advantages.
Mm-hmm.
And they wanted small size. This is in that period. This is another reason why the Soviets, T-64s, T-72s, and T-80s all have that very low profile. It's because remember, Soviet tanks are offset from Western tanks and how they're being developed. So, and that's not because they're counters to each other. It's just when these nations are getting around for their next generation of tanks. So, in the period where the Soviets are designing this, laser rangefinders really aren't much of a thing throughout most of NATO. You're still talking optical rangefinders. You're still talking fire and adjust. And so Soviets are still sticking with that small profile, low to the ground, squat tank. And well, HSTVL and some of these others are also low profile, small, all of that. Now, there are different things behind it, a focus on a more deployable, more rapid U.S. Army rather than a very, very heavy mechanized ground force. The U.S. teeters back and forth between these quite consistently. Which, when you look at where the U.S. is globally, that kind of makes sense. But yeah, that's what these things are.
YouTube Minecraft Watcher asks, what if Britain in 1925 started a 5.25 inch dual-purpose production and development line to create a next... Well, not so much the next generation, but just dual-purpose guns in general. Because in 1925, that's not really a concept that exists. Not as we know it. Assuming they started a development program then, you would probably have gone... Well, A, it probably means that the British have been very, very far-sighted to adopt that as their standard dual-purpose gun caliber. Probably won't be adopted as their standard caliber for light use. Because that's just... It's a little bit too much gun for destroyers. But that is going to be the gun they arm their capital ships with as their secondaries. It's going to be the gun they arm their... Basically, the secondary gun they arm their capital ships with. It's going to be the gun that if they go for AA cruisers that are purpose-built like the Didos, that's what they're going to get. And it might even be the gun you start seeing the destroyer leaders getting. But what it will mean is by the time you get to the mid to late 30s, you are going to have mature mounts. You're going to have mature systems. You're going to have mature technical data, experience operations. You're going to have a very nice mount with a decent gun in it for the various generations of RN rebuilds and new construction in the 30s. Anyone got any comments or critique on that before we move on? No? Just me?
Not really.
Right,
Not
okay.
really.
So, final one. Final question, and that's a nice round, even about an hour and a half. Hey, what do you know, everyone? I was dead on the money. Hey! Civil Gunnery Officer asks, opinions on the Spanish heavy cruiser, the Canarias class. Do you think it's a carbon copy of the County class? And also, what if the Spanish had to choose between American, Italian, or British designs for the proposed Tenerius Class CA instead of just British designs? Okay, this question runs on a few misconceptions and common mistakes attributed to the Canarius class. Now, the Canarius class, despite her appearance, is a wholly Spanish design. And there is a reason she looks the way she does and is armed the way she is. The Spanish wanted a heavy cruiser. And so they went to their yards and their largest naval constructor, SECN, and said, we want a heavy cruiser. And so the Society Española de Construcción Naval went away and designed them a cruiser. And here's the thing you've got to know about this corporation. It's 40% owned. Well, sorry, it's owned by the British and Spanish Association. And so John Brown, Vickers, and Armstrong were the people in charge of the yard. And if you ask John Brown, Vickers, and Armstrong to build you a heavy cruiser and arm it, what do you think you're going to get? You got a ship that looks, talks, and walks very much like a county-class heavy cruiser. Because that's what they had experience building. It's not so much that they opted for an export design, it's just that the people running SECN and its owners, the design staff, they were British or had been trained by the British. Had connections with British arms manufacturers, hence where the 8-inch guns come from. It was not an export design. Basically, in order for them to opt for any different design or style of cruiser, as the question proposes, you would need the yards to be owned by someone else. Basically. As it was, they were ordered around the time that the counties were finishing design and entering service from people who had links to the people building the counties. So the easiest solution was, well, let's take the latest and greatest thing we have from the people we work with. And it turns out when you do that, you get a ship that looks, walks, and talks like a county. Except a fair bit bigger. Well, a little bit bigger. And with some of the weight-saving things that a county had to do, not included. Because it's not a treaty ship.
Just to quickly touch on something that Knight has said, based on what I'm seeing of Bismarck's operational history, there is no feasible way for it to run aground in Wales and maintain its original operational history.
Yeah.
It's not possible for it to run aground in Wales and maintain its operational history. The two things cannot be true at the same time.
Yep. Just for example, and the reason, something else about the Canarius, so they've got a much more built-up superstructure, which adds weight. They have a much better and heavier secondary battery, and a lot heavier torpedo armament. And they're also better protected, in some ways.
Sorry for the diversion there, Fleet.
No,
but
it's
I wanted
fine.
to make sure I wanted to make sure I wasn't going to shove my size 13 boot further towards my colon, and was instead going to be removing it. Because I'm very good. I'm very good at fitting that 13 composite toe capped waterproof 8-inch boot into my esophagus and lower. So
I put that on a t-shirt because that is funny. That is aggressively funny. Oh, oh dearie me. I suppose, given the fact we have a little bit of time before, we have 15 minutes left, I suppose I can indulge in a little bit of discussion not related to a question. So, as we alluded to a little bit at the beginning of this, when me and Cyclic said a bit of a chuckle, things are going down. And we may have something to talk about on Monday, possibly. Maybe. Depending on how things go.
We could have a lot to talk about. Not that I'll be here for it, but
I suppose a brief grounding in what we know so far wouldn't hurt.
so far Israel is carrying out strikes with the aim of destroying, to the extent they can, the Iranian nuclear program. There are targets that the Israelis cannot hit with airstrikes alone, unless they go the very spicy rock way. And it seems they have no inclination of wanting to do that, because evidently they have been discussing with the U.S. Using their own special forces instead, which is a lot more risky from a target destroying perspective. But geopolitically, a lot less risky for them. These targets can be hit with airstrikes and conventional, well, as conventional as a 30 to 40,000 pound bunker buster is conventional, by the US. So there is a lot of pressure for the US to join in the airstrikes. Also to ensure that Iran does not get nuclear weapons, because Iran getting a nuclear weapon opens up, even if they don't use it and don't share it with their proxies, which they've had no compunctions before about sharing some of their advanced weaponry, if not most of it, with their proxies. So even with those two aside, the Iranians getting nuclear weapons, particularly when you look at how they had structured their program, it was structured to produce a large amount of weapons. They already had a large amount of delivery capabilities already in service for use conventionally as dual use systems. You're going to see multiple Gulf states attempt to go nuclear themselves. And I think that is a scenario that everybody agrees is a bad thing. Negotiations have proved fruitless. The Iranians have continued on. All it seemed to get them to do was dial it back from immediately going for the bombs to a hair trigger to sprint for a bomb within a couple of weeks, which is not satisfactory either, because it can take a couple of weeks to build up the capability to seriously engage the program. And by then it will be too late, because the Iranians, with the way their program seems to have been structured, will have several already mated to delivery systems ready to be fired. So Israel opened up airstrikes and went for it. Their claims of Iran being days away lent somewhat significant credence by a UK and French intelligence assessment from a few months ago, stating that the Iranians were mere months away, potentially 2 to 3 months away from having operational weapons. If the US does join in these strikes, and potentially even if the US doesn't, the Iranians may make an attempt to close the Straits of Hormuz. In which case you are going to get to see how the US peels that sort of typically what's called a anti-access area denial capability. You're going to get to see how the US peels that apart, and in many cases jumps in immediately to prevent or mitigate the full establishment of said capability, because part of that is going to involve the Iranians attempting to mine the Straits of Hormuz. If they do attempt to throw all of their remaining capability behind blocking the Straits of Hormuz, what you're going to see is an air and missile engagement, series of large-scale air and missile engagements by naval and air forces. You are going to see a protracted strike campaign by multiple U.S. carriers. No, this is well beyond Operation Praying Mantis, Gunnery Officer. You are going to see minesweeping operations, and you are going to see anti-submarine operations, because the Iranians now have a decent number of submarines. They have a couple kilos. Those are probably the least concerning of them.
The
because
kilos
they're
are the
old.
least. Oh, there we go. I was about to say why, but there you go.
Well, kilos are also just way overblown in what they are. In the 80s, they were very quiet as a design. By modern standards, let's just say some of the discussions that myself and some people that I know have had, all in an unclassified manner, of course, with some experienced ASW warfare individuals that we know in multiple navies, have indicated that while obviously it's a submarine, you treat it with respect, a kilo is target practice. They are not quiet, and they're SSKs. They're not fast. They're not able to run. The biggest thing a submarine can do for survival against a torpedo is run early if they think they've been fired on. A kilo can't do that because it's not a nuclear boat, barring the one nuclear AIP kilo, but that still can't run because it's an AIP boat. And it's also not really a kilo. It's hilariously larger. Their sensor suite is not great. We have no idea what kind of submarine capability the United States has pushed into the Persian Gulf and around the Straits of Hormuz, but I suspect there's multiple.
Sneaky boys doing sneaky things.
You're going to see a big series of airstrikes focused on Iranian shore-launched anti-ship missile capabilities. You're going to see the Iranian, both regular and IRGC navies, absolutely plastered.
Removed from the playing field, even.
Yes. And you're going to see a series of ASW actions focused both on if the kilos are even in a position to deploy, which I'm not sure if they even are. But against Iran's smaller coastal submarines that they have, which they have a decent number of, focused on killing those. There's already an LCS in the area. It has already sortied from the base in Bahrain, along with the U.S. minesweeping squadron that has been there. I suspect we may see more deploying out of Naval Station Mayport, though they are several weeks out. We will see. They are uniquely situated for dealing, or not situated, but a unique set of capabilities for dealing with this situation. In that they are designed to utterly smack the crap out of Corvette-sized vessels and down. So they will be very useful in this fight. And I mean, we already saw an LCS, get combat action ribbons and stuff like that, and shoot down a anti-ship missile and a bunch of drones, providing escort to merchants in the Red Sea last year, or earlier this year, whichever one, which I can't remember the time span. It might actually be the same LCS that is there. If that's the case, it will be able to provide close protection to the minesweepers, while it itself exists under the overall protection of probably an Arleigh Burke, two, likely two, just because of the threat environment, and carrier aircraft and the like, and land-based aircraft. We will see what happens. The U.S. is currently flowing more air assets in the region. Into the region. F-22s arrived today. F-35s, I believe, arrived yesterday. There is a second carrier arriving this weekend into the theater. USS Carl Vinson has Hornets, Super Hornets armed with AIM-174. That is the air-launched SM-6. She has some of the newest, most capable anti-radiation / air defense targeting and other ground targets because of the way their seeker is. Weapons on the planet in her air wing. And she's got F-35Cs in her air wing. Nimitz, which is the carrier racing across the Indian Ocean right now, does not have F-35Cs. I'm unclear on what her air wing has weapons-wise, but to be honest, the Iranian Air Force is
not what it used to be. Shall we say?
Yeah, or Air Est Kaput.
Oh wow! So I mean, as far I thought the whole thing was that it had been degraded. You're saying it's just the Israelis have just declared it non-existent, basically, at this point.
I mean, they might have a handful of aircraft left, but they're not coming up.
Yeah, I know the Iranian. Wow, I tried to say Israeli and Iranians at the same time.
Oh my god!
I know
the Tomcats were so little of a capability for them. Their primary air-to-air fighters were their MiG-29s.
Yeah,
and they're gone.
Yeah, but it's still sad.
They got a Viking funeral.
Knight, it's not
Fair,
Knight. It's
fair.
not going to be a major war. There's going to be a lot of air operations.
Fleet. This is depending how this could actually turn into a rather large-scale war, depending what happens.
Forgive my brain, but my brain is currently not working. How?
Let me put it to you this way. What do you have to do to secure nuclear materials if the Iranian regime collapses?
Put boots on the ground.
Yeah, because you're not leaving loose nuclear material and bomb components free for anyone to take in the Middle East. It's just, hopefully you're not dumb enough to stick around for nation building. Which I don't think the appetite exists in the West for that, so that's good.
And what I will also point out is that, well, I mean, even so, major conflict. I mean, wouldn't that be kind of a smash and grab rather than a major conflict? I mean, I understand the forces involved will be significant, but it's the US. You guys can go in.
You're talking about potentially 100,000 or more troops.
And also,
because you have to provide significant security for cleanup and then transport operations.
as much.
I don't know if we're at that case because none of that is, publicly available. And we also don't know the stability of the Iranian regime. But it's also possible that 5 years from now we're dealing with an Iran that's going through a Syria situation.
I also want to say that for people who've talked to me in private, they know my opinions on this administration. Even I don't think this administration has degraded the strategic and long-term thinking capability of the DoD to the point where the DoD is not going to attempt to run down any and all viable intelligence leads on the location of nuclear material or apparatus. And that, given the terrain of the area, could take years to do.
Doesn't mean you're occupying it for years, but it does mean there's going to be a large number of ground operations ongoing in the theater.
And it does indicate a certain level of continuous operations for years, even if it's not an outright occupation. We have strikes and teams going in here, there, and everywhere, running down
Potentially, there, depending how this could go, we could have entire U.S. airborne brigades conducting paradrop operations to seize airfields for follow-on forces to come in.
Damn, an actual combat jump. That hasn't been seen for a while.
Now, let me back up here a little bit. That is not part of the initial counter-nuclear program strikes, in all likelihood, at all. That is more a contingency sort of deal if the Iranian regime falls as a result of this too quickly to secure its own shit.
Basically, if they basically collapse rather than regime change.
Well, not even regime change. It's if they collapse too quickly, because they could peter their way out, and 5 years from now we have an Iranian civil war. Well, if they have secured most of their nuclear material in like 1 or 2 locations, that's a lot easier to deal with than it dispersed across their country as it would be for initially, because of all their different sites.
Yeah, gunnery officer. The funniest thing could be
it may or may not be in reverse, gunnery officer.
Yeah, I was gonna say that.
Don't assume things get better.
That would be the funniest thing. Would be a return to the Shah, but that's highly unlikely.
I wouldn't want to return to the Shah. I mean, the ideal situation is we end up with a democratic Iran, but I'm so jaded on hoping for the ideal.
Well, yeah, we all are. That's why I'm saying someone
so,
might claim legitimacy in that way, which would lead to more problems. I'm not saying that it's an ideal. I'm just saying
we end up with a military dictatorship.
Yeah.
And no pretense of the Shah. It's just the Generalissimo or whatever you want to call him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I kind of talking out of my ass here, but I don't think that the Iranian culture has survived, or the Shah culture
was not
has
well
survived to the point to support somebody coming in and saying, "I am the true heir." That
remember, the revolution started out much more on a democratic guise, and then got hijacked.
Yeah.
So,
as they tend to do.
Yeah.
So, like, don't. But anyways, off of this, it's entirely possible that in the operation to clear the straits, if the Iranians try to close them, the U.S. has vessels get sunk, because we're talking about that kind of a missile threat. We are talking about hundreds of anti-ship missiles. Now, obviously, the U.S. isn't running carriers through there, but it's possible Burks get sunk. It's possible LCSs get sunk, minesweepers get sunk. Heck, it's possible the Iranians managed to sink a Virginia-class nuclear submarine.
That is going to wake up. Well, no, actually, no. It's not going to wake up.
It's just dumb luck. An Iranian submarine or surface vessel gets a hit and fires a torpedo, and well.
Yeah, no, I was about to say that'll wake up the European navies, and I'm saying no, it fucking won't. If they haven't, they've already
had a massive wake up call because of the Red Sea.
Yeah,
and some of them, cough cough, the Italians and the French, although more so the Italians, had a massive wake up call beforehand when they looked at what the Turks' long term plans were. The Italians are now out there talking about a fleet of 6 guided missile destroyers.
And in the UK,
a good chunk of which we're talking 64 to 96 cells.
And in the UK, we're still sat with our fingers in our ears, pretending we're still the USN's ASW force. Fuck's sake.
With brand new ships that can't fire torpedoes, either standoff or over the side, and rely entirely upon their helicopters in the notoriously flight preferential weather of the North Atlantic.
Don't remind me. Although then again,
that's why I gave the range, Scoot.
Although then again, If you're talking about 31, 31 is literally just supposed to be.
I'm not talking about 31. I'm talking about 26.
Oh, hang on. Is it? Hang on. Hang on. I might be getting my frigate designations mixed up. 1 second.
26 is the ASW frigate.
Yeah. God damn it.
That's
Oh yeah.
questionable.
Yeah. That
In a
okay.
lot of
That
ways,
really
because
is
it's-
questionable. Like I understand that the bloody 20. I understand that the bloody the 31s for all their flaws and weaknesses of armament are supposed to just be a way to get mass into the force. I can understand that.
Very low end patrol mass at distance.
Yes. I get that. But
You know my opinions on that.
I know, but look, if we're going to rebuild the RN, we can't run before we can jump. We've got so much grounds to cover. You know that.
Yeah, the answer to that is to scale that back considerably. Until you actually have the ships. As soon as Type 31 can be replaced, they should be sold.
In fact, they may be.
They should not exist in the Royal Navy for more than
10 years.
the absolute minimum time it takes to build better ships.
Yep. I completely agree. The only thing out of this whole...
Type 26 is honestly embarrassing.
Yeah, I know.
And I know I'm going to trigger people with that, but
No.
it's a
I-
ASW frigate that has serious problems in a modern ASW environment. If you're up against anything that isn't a outdated Russian submarine, like if you're up against any sort of submarine with a wire-guided torpedo and it fires at you in Type 26, there is nothing that you can do to force that submarine to have to break the wire. You have to wait for your helicopter to get there.
Yeah.
You're dead.
And you haven't even taken the other bastard with you. Or attempted to.
Well, your helicopter might. It's a Merlin, but
Well, the thing is...
heaven forbid, by the way, that you run into a Yazin and it just goes, all right, I'm not even dealing with you. I've picked you up. Because a lot of people, and for here, I'm going to paraphrase, what's his name? H.I. Sutton. Modern Russian submarines are on par with their Royal Navy and U.S. counterparts in quieting.
Yeah, like that's not surprising.
And that is the official public assessments of those submarines by Western navies. And it's backed up by everything that we can find in the open source environment. Okay? They are much more heavily armed. They just have fewer of them than the US. And the other thing to keep in mind is modern Russian submarines can fire anti-ship missiles at you too.
Yeah.
And a decent amount of them.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed.
If you're only carrying 24-point defense missiles, you got a problem.
Yeah.
I don't care that they're as good as Cam. Cam's good. But when you can have 8 fired at you,
It ain't enough.
that's enough for shoot, shoot, look, shoot. If you have any more misses, or heaven forbid, because it's a submarine armed with VLS,
more missiles.
and that's assuming you react fast enough, because Type 26 is a single-faced rotator.
Fuck. Damn it. I just thought
It's
I'd...
already caught off guard. If it's focused on something else and a submarine catches it off guard with a missile attack.
Yeah, I know. I'm just looking at I'm looking bloody hell. Oh, for God's sake, it is. Oh, fuck. I had looked because I remember there was a third frigate and I was looking for it. I thought it was 33, it's not, it's 32. 32 is literally 32 is not a frigate. They're gonna,
Vapor. It's vaporware.
and also politely, given the specs, even if it
There are no specs.
given the briefs and things that have been discussed, at best it's an OPV with ambition. So that's not
Yeah,
even
that's
going to
Type
help.
31 as well.
Yeah, but Type 31 is at least the basic bare bones, just about I can qualify as a frigate, gov honest.
No, it's it's a frigate-sized OPV. They took everything off.
I will point out there's a reason for doing that, given that politely, while everyone knows we need armed OPVs, you, for the love of God, don't want to tell the government that they can do things like that with, you know, a large OPV, because you know what they'll do.
I mean,
They won't.
No, Fleet, you're completely missing the forest for the trees here. That role shouldn't have been fulfilled by a ship that size. To be blunt, armed or not. Quite frankly, the role that Type 31 was originally conceived for should have been filled by a river class that has been stretched or expanded or something similar to that. Okay? Not taking an air defense frigate, stripping everything out of it, throwing a handful of Sea Scepter to the point where it's basically meaningless. 240 mils and a 57. Okay.
I know.
All right, gentlemen, given that we've gone 10 minutes over fleet erstwhile goal here, you want to knock this on the head before we get too depressed?
Probably should, but I've been reminded again that the Royal Navy is once again kicking itself in the foot. Again. Typical. Absolutely fucking typical.
I
Yes,
don't think that was a decision made by the Royal Navy.
It's a decision made by governments everywhere, and it was probably a decision made, what, a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
Yeah, probably. I mean, it's more mass, so there is that, I guess, so that's the only real good thing about it.
It's
yes,
not
but in the
useful
nice...
mass.
Okay.
That's
Even
what
though I said I
matters.
want to wrap this over the head, I'm going to rejoin with this. The UK does not have the resources, either tangible or intangible, to win on mass. It has to. It's kind of in Japan interwar period framework now.
Yeah.
It has to kill more than it gets killed because it cannot sustain losses.
Yeah.
Anyway, on that cheery note, catch up ramblings 26.
Yeah. Been there, done that. Obviously on Monday there will be obviously a ramblings as normal, so that'll be very nice. And of course, there will obviously be a big announcement on Monday, and no, it's not related to what we've discussed. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you all on Monday if you're on YouTube. Oh no, yes, I'll see you all on Sunday for Brew Ships, and of course there'll also be other streams on my channel as well. Bye, everybody.